Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us for today's webinar, Communicating the Value of Design in Architecture. My name is Felix, and I'm the webinar coordinator at the Continuing Education Department here at the OAA. We will begin today's webinar by acknowledging the land on which we are meeting and calling in from today. For millennia, the place we call Ontario has been inhabited by Indigenous peoples and nations who have been stewards of the land and are deeply connected to its rich cultural and natural landscape. We would like to invite you in a moment of reflection to acknowledge our shared responsibility to address past and present injustices and provide space for Indigenous knowledge and worldviews to shape the architectural landscape of Turtle Island. Before we commence, I would like to share some important information to ensure an effective and professional webinar experience. Please be informed that this session is being recorded for quality and educational purposes. In order to maintain a stable internet connection, we have muted all participant microphones and disabled video feeds. We highly encourage engagement through our Q&A window. Feel free to submit any questions you may have for our speaker. These will be addressed in the designated question and answer period at the end of the presentation. For those seeking continuing education learning hours, please note that attendance is crucial. A minimum of 80% attendance is required for these hours to be accredited to your transcript. Please allow up to a few weeks for the processing and reporting of these hours. And lastly, please note that the presenter does not provide insurance, legal, or practice advice, and the OAA does not bear responsibility for errors or omissions in discussions during the webinar. For accessibility, we provide automated closed captioning service available in multiple languages to accommodate the needs of our diverse audience. But now, I'm excited to introduce you to our speaker today. Please welcome Enoch Sears.
Hello, Felix. Thank you. Okay. Well, I appreciate that, Felix. Thank you. Good to see everyone on here. And let's get into today's presentation. So I am just by way of, for those of you who don't know who I am, I'll go a little bit over about who I am, why I'm here, why you may want to consider listening to me. First thing I will say is the first reason you may not want to listen to me is because, as you may tell from my accent, I am an American. And not only that, I'm a Californian. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak here with the OAA. I have a great fondness in my heart for Ontario, for Canada in general. As a matter of fact, my great-grandfather immigrated to the United States from Toronto, so we still have a lot of family up there, and I always love collaborating with the OAA. So let's jump into the topic in today's presentation, and I've asked Felix to open up the chat box so I can see your comments as we go along, because I like to make these presentations. Let's face it, you're going to be spending about 60 minutes here with me together, so I find that you're going to absorb more information. It's going to be more enjoyable for you if you take an active participation in the presentation. It's my invitation. You certainly don't have to. However, I would appreciate if you would just drop in hello or welcome or hi there into the chat box so we can see that, and then we'll get this party started and get this rolling. I'm going to share my screen here. I'm going to walk you through some core principles and concepts today around the topic, which I feel is just cannot be understated how important this topic is today. So let me share my screen here. Oh, hello. Hello, Gregory, Andrew. Hello, Melissa. Hello, Jan. Hello, Michael. Hello, Wenji and Mohammed, Alessia, Carl, Sean, Tessa, Patricia. Hello, Anastasia. Good to have everyone on here. I appreciate that. So first thing, Felix, if you could just let me know, come off mute for a second, let me know if you can see my screen. I have a bit of a blackboard here and I'm kind of scribbling just to make sure the technology.
Yes, I can, Enoch.
Okay, great. All right. Thank you. I appreciate that. So here's the topic today. We're going to talk about communicating the value of architecture. And the goal for today, from my side, is to unequivocally convince and persuade you that this is the key challenge, the key obstacle, and the most mission critical thing facing architectural practitioners today. Whether you're running a practice, whether you're an employee currently, this right here is the linchpin that the future of our profession and the future of our built environments and the future of our homes and the future of our cities hinges upon. Now, we know in the past couple of years, just in the past year or so, there's been incredible, like technology is just beginning to accelerate more than ever. And this has been talked about for years and years and years by futurists. As a matter of fact, Buckminster Fuller back in the 1960s predicted some of the things we have today, like a worldwide internet, like social media. It's pretty remarkable. So now we're seeing these things come to pass. And in addition to that, we have new things on the scene like artificial intelligence that we can already see are disrupting professions in the world, such as graphic design, such as writing, copywriting, marketing. So it's only a matter of time before these tools begin to infiltrate even more. And I say infiltrate not in a negative way, but begin to influence architects and architecture in general. So we know a lot of what we do is fairly rote. Some of it's very formulaic, some of it's very systematic. We have codes, we have particular building standards. A lot of it, like I said, there's a formula for it. So the thing with artificial intelligence today, and that's not what the presentation is going to be about, but it is a current issue we need to be talking about, is that things that are formulaic and systematic can be easily replicated and done by artificial intelligence, which means that the architectural industry is about to be very, very disrupted. Now, not to fear, no worries. There will always be opportunity for architects in the world. And the opportunity I want you to consider is going to be as a curator of design. So we don't know how it's going to shake out. We don't know how it's going to be affected over the next 5 years or so, but we do know it is going to be massively impacted. And what I'd have you consider is that, number one, you don't need to be afraid of the massive impact that AI is going to have. As a matter of fact, it's a benefit. So I was talking to a very successful CEO of a company in the architectural space recently, and he said, Enoch, here's the thing. And he happens to be also helping to build an AI application. He said there's going to be two kind of architects in the future. There's going to be those who adopt the technology, and there's going to be those who don't. So the only ones who need to worry or may have their lives really impacted negatively are those people who, when we have our head under the sand, we're not paying attention to current events, we're unwilling to change and shift the things that were working for us in the past. So why communicating the value of architecture? Well, consider that being able to communicate the value of your architectural services to a client, to colleagues, to consultants, to jurisdictional authorities is mission critical because it impacts so many things in your architectural practice. This is the key. This is the number one skill for anyone who is running an architectural business. And notice that I say is running an architectural business, not architecture, right? So there's a key distinction here, and I'm guessing that most of your practice owners who are on the line today, there's a key distinction between running an architectural business and doing architecture. So obviously for architecture, there's a lot of skills that go into that. There's understanding codes, there's being able to be a big picture thinker, there's understanding how design works, massing, proportions, everything that we learned in architecture school. And then there's a whole nother complete side of it is once you step into ownership of an architectural practice, you have a whole nother set of responsibilities on your shoulder. You have a whole nother set of concerns and things that you are now responsible for. And consider that the number one thing that you are responsible for is communicating the value of what you and your team do to the world, to everyone outside, so that your team and you are empowered to actually do the architecture. In other words, if there's no communicating of the value of architecture, there is no architecture. If you're getting this, drop in a yes into the chat. Just let me know. Or if you don't agree, say, hell no, Enoch, you got it all wrong. William asked, what's a curator? That's a good question. Thank you. So a curator would be someone who, so say for instance, let me give you an example. They have AI programs nowadays who can actually learn your architectural style. So let's say that in your practice, not every practice is like this. In some practices, of course, you may have a particular style or a way that you like to design. You have that signature mark, right? Of course, we know, Richard Meyer, everything's white, right? Frank Gehry, we know his crazy forms, right? So AI can now take a look at your portfolio and kind of understand the moves that you're making, the kind of work you do. And there are programs that are coming forth that can then you simply type in a prompt and it will model a building based upon the work that you've done. I know this sounds absolutely crazy. It's like wild. It's like, wow, how can it do that? Right. So this is given the opportunity maybe for clients who like your architecture to say, hey, what if I did myself a house in this style? What would that look like? Of course, it's a very long bridge. Just because they get a rendering or an image of that building, it doesn't mean they're going to build it. That doesn't mean they're going to be able to actually bring that architecture forth, right? Which is why your job is always going to be indispensable. It's going to change, but it's going to be indispensable. So William, a curator is basically someone who does that, right? It's someone who helps manage the process, who uses their artistic expertise to help the people make the best informed decisions and gets the best product. As an example, in a museum, a curator is the person who chooses which pieces of art are brought in to showcase on the wall. That's a curator. So they're making very deliberate choices about, we don't want this piece of art, we want this one, we don't want this one, we want this one. So again, this is a creative skill that is never going to be done through AI. And so another thing here that is going to be solidifying your value as a practitioner here moving forward is the experience that you create for your clients. So consider that some of the value that you have, I'm going to do some of those over here. Number one is a curator. This is someone who's making informed decisions, who's advising, who's acting a bit like a consultant. Because I could go to an AI program tomorrow and I could say, design me, I would say a residence. Design me a 3-bedroom residence, 2,700 square feet, and I'm sorry, I don't know what that is in square meters. Modern contemporary design. Boom, brrr, it can do some renderings for me, right? But as a lay person, if I'm not a licensed architect, if I haven't gone through design school, if I'm not a designer, I'm going to be making some very critical errors in that mistake. So this is where the architects come into it. So we have architects being able to enter into this conversation as the industry is beginning to be disrupted. Let's see over here. All right, let's see. Sean, makes sense so far. I'm hoping that there's a further distinction between communicating the value of architecture and marketing. Tell me more about that. What do you mean, the distinction between communicating the value of architecture and marketing? What do you mean by that? And I'd definitely love to touch on that. Okay. All right. So let's back up a second and let's just ask ourselves the question. And this may seem like a silly question, but there's a reason why I'm going here. Is communicating the value of architecture even important? Like, why are we here? Like, is this even important? We know that clients oftentimes are bottom line focused. They're always looking at how much things cost as opposed to the investment value of the product they're getting. We know there are macroeconomic forces that impact architecture far beyond your ability to influence it. So, c'est la vie, right? Continue to try to communicate the value of architecture. But is this an issue? Is this really a problem? Do I have it right when I say that this is the number one thing that is impacting our industry today, is a gap in this area? Well, let's look at what I've seen in the past 10 years of consulting with architectural practices and actually being an architect and practicing architecture. So a little bit on my background. I'm just going to quickly tell you who I am, so you can put a little bit of context into what we're going over today. Because I've not only experienced these things firsthand as a practitioner, but I've also moved into a consulting role, just because I've discovered that I'm not actually an architect. I was sort of like the guy who went to architecture school, thought he was an architect, got licensed 10 years later, thought he was an architect, and discovered, hey, I'm actually really not an architect. And what I really enjoy doing is I enjoy supporting other people doing architecture. Okay. Oh, Frank Garrow is from Ontario. That's a wonderful piece of trivia. Okay, it's great. All right, so who am I? Why am I here? Oh, before we go on, I did want to invite you and let you know that I have a follow-up presentation that I would like to make for free to the OAA members here, because you are such a beloved part of my in the past relationship that I've had with you. But I would love for you to, if you're a firm owner, to attend a free training that I'm giving next week on the Smart Practice Method. It's called Smart Practice. If you go to smartpracticemethod.com, you can sign up for that for free. We'll be going more into how to run a small architectural practice so that the business doesn't get in the way of the architecture. So more on that later. Quickly about me, back in 1990, I was a teenager this was during high school, I was always a bit of an entrepreneur and I had a paper route. I'll tell you in a minute why that's important. Fast forward another 10 years, found myself at Cornell University with big old eyes of wanting to be an architect. And so I went to a traditional, kind of Beaux-Arts architectural education at Cornell. It's very theoretical. Rem Koolhaas came from there or studied there. So it's very much that kind of like theoretical type of, um, high design. I think we're trying to compete with like the GSD or something like that, right? So I went to the undergraduate school at Cornell. Fast forward another 8 years or so, and I found myself a licensed architect. I was working for a firm based in Houston, United States, and they had sent me down to Panama, Central America, because I speak fluent Spanish, having lived in Central America in my early 20s. And down there, it was around 2008. We were doing all sorts of speculative developments. This was a condominium project that was on this beautiful beach down on Isla Colon, which is the island archipelago of Bocas del Toro. So it was super fun. I mean, I wasn't even working full time because this was still a startup. I was sort of the boots on the ground coordinating with the architecture team. We were doing a little bit of construction. I was also coordinating with some of the local authorities. And I thought, this is amazing. This is exactly why I got into architecture. And I've been out of school 10 years. I had never been through a recession, period. I graduated right after the 2001 dot-com bubble burst. And so I hadn't ever lived through anything. So I kind of lived during the good times in architecture. And during around 2008, 2007, money was flowing. I mean, as a young architect in my 20s, I was earning near $100,000 a year, which was an incredible salary back then for a newly licensed architect. I wasn't working full time because we were still getting up and running. So, I spent a lot of time on the beach, hanging out with my family, and of course, coordinating designs and working on the project we were working on. Now, what ended up happening is the Great Recession hit. Those of you who were around then realize what happened. I got blindsided. I never knew that there was these big macroeconomic forces. Although my employer had told me, he would tell these horror stories about the recessions in the late 70s, the recession in the early 80s, and the bust in Houston when the oil market went under, and then a recession in the early 90s. I'm just like, we would just hear his war stories. He would talk about how he had the leasing company came in and repossessed all of his furniture, so he literally got shut down. I was just like, wow, that sounds crazy. And then here I was living it in 2008. So I got laid off. Everyone got laid off. The company I was working for came to a screeching halt because all the banks pulled the funding for the products we were working on. And I was completely blindsided. Had no idea what had happened. I was like a deer in the headlights. Had no idea what to do. What I did know is that I'd always wanted to start my own firm. And I thought, hey, this is a great opportunity, right? I can look around. No one seems to be hiring right now. And there's tons of architects on the market. Let's go start my own firm now. So I moved with my wife and my 3 small children. We moved back to California. And I had the bright idea that I was just going to start a firm. What I didn't know was that this was completely naive. Starting a firm, as those of you who've done it, you know that it takes much more than just hanging up your shingle. So as I moved back to California, at that time, the unemployment rate was over 50%. It was 60, 70% in the area in which I was at, right? And so as you can imagine, all the projects were paused. The only projects happening were big government projects and projects that had been continually going on. And frankly, none of the firms where I lived were hiring. They just weren't, right? So I was sitting there wondering what to do. So I began to hustle. I began to try to network. I began to try to find architectural work. It wasn't enough. So in this deep sense of financial scarcity, because as a young architect, I didn't have a lot of savings. I wasn't making money in architecture. And so I had to make ends meet. So what ended up happening is here I was in 2009. Okay. I mean, this isn't a picture of me, but literally I was hustling and grinding. I had to get a paper route. I had a daytime job as a substitute teacher. And then I would hustle and I would try to do networking at night to grow my architectural practice. I was working to the bone. We were living in a nasty apartment in Fresno, California. And I was basically sitting in the space of despondency and wondering what the heck happened here? How did I get here? I thought I did everything right. I thought I went to the great school. I thought I had great jobs. I went to great, and here I was, unemployed, no work, no money, taking public assistance to be able to feed my family while I woke up at 1 a.m. every single morning to throw newspapers for 3 hours or 4 hours, then going into a substitute teaching job for kids who didn't really want me to be there. And then after that, if I had extra time before I had to go to bed at 7 p.m., trying to hustle and grind and get some architectural projects on the side. It was a disaster. And it would have been 2009, Christmas of 2009. And I remember it was Christmas Eve. It was the night before Christmas. And I was sitting there just staring awake at the ceiling. I was going to have to get up in a couple hours. And I just had this intense feeling of sadness, desperation, loneliness. And I was just wondering, how did I get here? And as that question settled on my mind, a little idea came in, and this epiphany happened. What I realized was that it wasn't that I didn't know how to do architecture. I had my architectural skills, but what it was is I didn't know anything about running a business, and primarily how to, the topic of today, communicate the value of architecture and how to get the projects in the door. Okay. So this was back in 2012. Fast forward a little bit, I started a podcast called the Business of Architecture Podcast. That grew. Now it's one of the top podcasts in the architectural niche. We've been producing content for the past 10 years. But after about a year of producing that content, other small architectural practitioners began to reach out to me and begin to ask me for ideas and tips. And so I thought, hey, why don't I try, since I'm sort of loving this business side of things, why don't I try collecting some information and seeing if I can then transmute and give this information back to my potential clients? My potential clients or other architects, colleagues who became my clients, right? So this is what founded what became Business of Architecture. So right now we are a consulting company that helps small architectural practices set up their practices for freedom and success and become what we call the free architect. And since then, we've worked with a lot of firms in the United Kingdom. We've worked for a great number of firms in Canada. We've worked for a lot of firms in the United States, firms in Mexico, South Africa. It's been an amazing, amazing journey for the past 10 years. I've spent literally over $1 million developing and discovering and researching what works for running a small architectural practice that doesn't get in the way of your life and your architecture. On top of that, I'm a father of 6 children, so you can imagine I'm pretty busy and constantly being asked to speak at different industry events, leading networking workshops. I spoke at the AIA at least 3 or 4 times in your live conference, which has been very fun. Once in Montreal, once when you had in Hamilton. So I really enjoy doing that. And maybe I'm not going to see you there in Niagara Falls, but maybe next year in Ottawa, I'll have that opportunity. Okay. So that's who I am. Now let's jump back over to this conversation about the value of architecture. And I'm going to tell you a little anecdote. This literally happened yesterday. I was on a call with one of the firm owners who we work with, and he was telling us a story about a mediation that he'd been in last week. And there were a couple other firm owners on the call, and we thought this was interesting because, it's interesting to hear about what happens when you go into a mediation. So here's what ended up happening. He got a message from a contracting partner who had been searching the internet, the web, and he came across a website of a builder in Houston that had some house designs on it that looked very familiar. And so he went back to my client's website and he was like, that looks really familiar. He went back and he noticed that it looked exactly like my client's own home. So this architect's very, very successful in the residential space. He runs a $10 million practice, has a team of 25 people. So they're really crushing it, doing a lot of high-end luxury projects. And as sort of like a couple years ago, he decided to design his own home, built his beautiful dream home in his hometown where he lives, and was very, very proud of it. Now, as you can imagine, when he saw that a builder in Texas had literally and he showed us this on the call yesterday, like he brought up the 2 elevations of his home on one hand, right off his website, and then the elevation of the renderings from this developer. And they were just, all of us just gasped. Our jaws hit the ground. It was like, oh my God, I can't believe this. Like it's almost a carbon copy, right? So my architect friend, he went after this guy with his lawyers, and now they're in mediation. He's getting a settlement. But here's why I want to bring this up. Because this builder, so the front elevation of this house, he calls it transitional contemporary French. It's going to be very ugly sketchier than I'm going to do, but it looks something like this. I'm going to give you a little sketch over here, and please forgive me because I've been out of architecture for quite a while. It has a garage on. I'm not fan of garages, but in the U.S. in our car culture, that's what we do. So it kind of looks like this, right? It's kind of the overall massing of the house. Nothing too fancy, but it's just very nicely. It's well done. It has the entry is all glass here. So it's like this black gridded glass with a huge window up above. So it kind of really merges the contemporary with the traditional very nicely. So to make a long story short, as they're in mediation, he discovered how much money this developer had paid to get these house plans developed. Any guesses? Any guesses? Anyone want to guess? So my client, by the way, he said if I would have charged someone to do my design for my house based upon his fees and his team, he would have charged $250,000. I think the home's about a 3,500 square foot home. And for those of you who know the conversion to metric, please help me out there. But yeah, how much do you think? Just throw out a guess. Put in the chat box. How much do you think that that this developer had paid his local designer / architect, who actually I don't think was licensed, to actually do these house plans? By the way, which they had built 4 or 5 of these in. And this is a very nice development that went up in Dallas, Texas, where there's lots of money. It's a wealthy place. This is a wealthy developer. So I'm having some guesses in here. These are all great guesses. 50K, 70K, 25K, 20,000, 10,000, 5,000, 15K. Okay, here we go. All right, so $9,000. Okay. $9,000. Yeah, that does deserve a LOL, Anastasia. I mean, it's kind of, we all laughed at it. It's sad, but it really reflects, I think, a great parable of what we're up today, what we're up against today as architectural practitioners. And I'm still licensed architect, so I still count myself as one of the crowd, but I'm on the back end. I'm on the back end leading, trying to lead the charge as a guide, saying, hey, here's some things that we can look at together as practitioners. We need to stand for our value, because what this is right here is this just is a difference of one simple thing. Value, and not just value, but specifically perception of value. Okay. So there's a whole field of study called behavioral economics that specifically studies why we as human beings make financial choices. It's fascinating. I could lead a whole day seminar on this very subject. We don't have enough time to go into it today. But one of the key findings of behavioral economics is that value is simply in the, like they say, like art is in the eye of the beholder, value is in the eye of the beholder. And we can see this just logically, it makes sense, right? Some people value a Ferrari and a Lamborghini. There's some of you here on this call, maybe most of you, who if you had unlimited resources or millions and millions of dollars, you wouldn't buy a Ferrari or a Lamborghini. You wouldn't do that. You're like, I'm happy with my Tesla, or I want to get my Cybertruck, or I want to get my, who knows, my Toyota Corolla that has 200,000 miles on it, right? The key here is that we all see value differently. So this is very key to get, because you need to understand that the way you see value as an architect is going to be very different from the way your clients perceive value. And even between that, if you take a group of clients, let's say client number 1, you have client number 2, and then you have client number 3 over here. And these may be commercial clients or residential clients, or they may be facility managers or people who run teams that are commissioning your work. Each one of these people is going to have a very distinct and different viewpoint on what value actually means. Like, is this making sense? So this makes it more challenging, because then what it means is that there's no commonly accepted, there's overlaps in the terms of the way a value is perceived, but it's not like there's a script where I can just reach, I can just send you like this little AI program that's going to tell you what the value is of your architecture, because it's very situational. It's very dependent on your clients. So why do I think that this is the number one challenge facing architects today? Well, let's talk about, what do you see as some of the main challenges facing the architectural profession today? And I don't mean the big things that we can't control. I love what the Stoic philosophers said when they said, focus on what you can control and forget the rest. Now, this is a very empowering philosophy and principle, because we know that we're not going to be able to control what the US does with their federal interest rate. You're not going to be able to control what the Canadian central bank does and the government does in terms of their huge policies, maybe influence it slightly. But there's economic forces that are way beyond my control, way beyond your control, and way beyond our control as architects. However, the question is, what is it that we can control? What are the things we can control? And so that's what we're going to be focusing on today. All right. Now, what are some of the main challenges that we have in the industry? What are you saying right here? Okay, I'm going to read out what you all are putting. I want to know what you think. Like, from your perspective, what are some of the main challenges facing architects as an industry? Number 1, controlling contractor quality and prices. Okay, so Absolutely. I mean, that's hard because here's the thing. You know that you can give out one set of plans to one contractor and it can be vastly different than what another contractor might come back at you with. You also know that when there's a shortage of contractors, prices are going to skyrocket. So, yeah, there's a lot of variability there. Okay. I would call that something that's kind of out of our control. So, what are some things that are, um, but that's a good one. Clients not understanding everything we do, race to the bottom in fees. Okay, I'm going to throw that one up there. So, let's look at that. So, we have what's impacting us as architects. So it's race to the bottom. And what we can call that is price competition on price. Firms, and this is it. This is like we have no one to blame but ourselves. We have firms as architects. We eat our own young. Can I just get a hell yes in the chat box if you like agree with this or like look at other professions? Someone said that there's no set fees in architecture like other professions. Lawyers, like it's very rare for lawyers to undercut each other. They just know that hey, my fee is going to be $550 per hour. Doctors, same thing. They're fighting, they're banding together. You don't have some doctor trying to like, I'm cheaper than that other doctor, go with me. Like, where does this happen with other professions? Okay. So I understand why it happens. I understand that we as architects have been on the defensive and put into a place of having our fees compressed and then we get desperate and then we compete with each other based on price. I get that. It's common, right? And eventually what happens is all the young people that get fired and get laid off, they come in, they have low overhead, and the only way they know to present their services and to win projects is like I'm going to be cheaper. And so there's this incessant pressing down of the fees that you get as an architect, okay? So certainly that's a huge one too. Okay. I'm going to put up here at the top is the undervalue of architecture is certainly a big trend out there. People don't understand. Someone mentioned here, people don't, general lay people do not understand what architects do. Number two, race to the bottom in terms of fees, price competition, undercutting. This is very real. Last year, I got reached out, a firm, a high-end, very recognized firm that you would probably recognize their name, reached out to me and my team, and they were like, hey, we need some help because we're facing severe value erosion in terms of what we do because some of the other top-tier firms here in the Los Angeles area are literally slashing their fees by 50% just to keep their team members busy. Like you all know, you've probably seen this happen. You may have even done this yourself. This is what happens in the architecture industry. It's crazy. It's wild. Okay. All right. So we have no set criteria for pricing, communicating the value of design over just building a space. Yes, I was on the client side, and the biggest, best firms undervalue their own services. There you go. Underline that comment. This is something that I hear this from the other side of the table as well. Developers saying, yeah, I don't get it. Like, I don't know why architects give away free work, So let's move on because we could talk about that for a long time. All right. Let's talk about the hiring challenge we have in architecture. So, another big issue that the industry in general faces is a severe shortage of middle tier architects, people that can take your projects from A to Z. Let me know if you find that's the case. What we have in the industry is we have basically a cycle of crops of young architects coming into the industry who are very hungry, who are willing to work hard. They're great, they're very cheap in terms of what you can pay them to hire them on. They lack experience, so you're doing a lot of training. Then we have these 6 cycles that happen. These people, half of them end up leaving the industry, like myself, right? Like the people my age right now is there's a huge shortage of people like me in practicing architecture. Okay. So you can't hire. You're working with inexperienced team members, inexperienced staff members. There are low wages, which compound, like low wages compared to what people can do in other professions. As a matter of fact, some of my colleagues in the consulting space, actually, I have some friends who you may have heard them speak. They teach architects and talk to architects about other opportunities where you can leverage your skills as an architect. Many times, earning 2 to 3 to 4 times what you earn in architecture, doing stuff that's still creative, still interesting on the cutting edge of technology. Okay, so architecture itself is bleeding out talent to these other professions and other areas like IT and software that have need of the skills that we have as architects. Okay, this means that now we have a lot of inexperienced team members, right? And Another industry I would say is the cyclical nature of architecture, of the profession, of the industry. And there's two areas to this. There's the macro cycles and there's the micro cycles. So when we say macro, we're talking macro, these would be big economic trends that we just have no control over. They just hit us like a tidal wave. The one that I would focus on more is your own micro trends of running your practice. So the cyclical nature of your own cash flow. Some months having very lucrative months, other months, having to make up for it, pull money from here, or maybe even losing money, and just having this like incessant up and down of like, we just haven't been able to stabilize our cash flow. So there's no stability in that. It's very stressful because there's that worry and fear about even though it seems like it, eventually it comes back. It's just like you're always living on this razor's edge of not having enough money. All right. So when we go back over here, I want you to consider when we look at this. Now, our client here, this architect, their firm, they're able to communicate enormous value to the marketplace, which is why they're able to charge $250,000, $250,000 for what they do. And they provide an excellent product, very high end, very high quality homes that are going to last for generations. These are like heirloom homes that people can pass down, right? Now, of course, what happens down here, these are homes that are built by production builders. Maybe the building quality isn't great. It doesn't have the same care. They don't appreciate the design, the quality that went into the project. And so we have a gap here, but the gap considers this. It is the firm's ability to communicate the value. Because here we have two very similar products. Like from the layperson's perspective, these two designs, if you were to put them up together, they'd be like, wow, that's the same house. Of course, us as architects, design professionals, we would look and we'd say, no, they're definitely not, right? So the question is, how do we then communicate this value? And consider that the communication of value is so important because what it gives you, or what you will lack, or what you won't have as a designer, is agency. When I say agency, I mean choice. This is what money does for a practice. Now, as a we call ourselves, some people call us business consultants, some people call us coaches, some people call us mentors. But we produce a lot of social media content. And it's interesting. Sometimes people respond to the content we provide, kind of talking about how, oh, it's not all about the money. You shouldn't just be about the bottom line, yada, 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 yada. So there's this theme in architecture that you either have to be all about the money or all about the design. Well, we're not about that. We're about the money. We're about being ridiculously wealthy as an architect. So you have agency, and also being about the design, being about responsible use of that money, being about building teams where people are well paid, where they have where they have good quality resources, where they can go on vacation, where they're able to support their families in a way that's powerful, that brings respect back to the profession. All right, so there's a couple, when we look at the idea of communicating value here, there's a couple of things that we need to understand. There's a couple of principles. Number one principle is that value is in the eye of the beholder. Principle number two is that your clients see value differently, very differently than you do. Now, recently, I was scrolling social media, and the American Institute of Architects, who I have great relationships with, and I'm also an AI member myself. That's our professional organization here in the States. They had produced, they're trying to advocate in this area. And I know that OAA is as well. That's why they had me on here. That's why they produce content around this. They want to help all of us raise up the profession. So on this it was a video that was done interviewing different architects about the value of design and the value of architecture. And as I was watching this from a marketer's perspective or from a consultant's perspective, I was thinking, oh man, I can see why this is why it's such a struggle. Because all the architects on there, as professional and academic as they were speaking like they were talking to other architects. There was only one architect on there who actually happened to be one of the former presidents of the AI here in the US, and she does residential architecture. There's only one architect who actually spoke about the value of architecture in terms of the way her clients would actually perceive it. And not to toot my own horn a little bit, but I will. She is a client who we've worked with, and so that's why she has a different frame on how to communicate the value of architecture. All right, so let's look at another principle. Principle number 3. This is huge. Proposing is not quoting. Okay. The architectural sales process that we currently have for small practices is very broken. I'm not going to speak to, because that would be a whole nother webinar, the larger, the process for RFPs, the process for procurement that you may work with when you're working for large entities, although all the principles I'm speaking about today will apply to that as well. But I'm going to refer to, like, typically what happens with smaller practices, they're working with private clients, corporations, they're doing projects and they're working directly with the owner. Usually it's a negotiated fee. They're competing maybe with a couple different architects. And here's the key. The way that we have this process for proposing right now is nothing more than quoting. If you think about it, because the way that you likely do it is you'll have a couple meetings to understand the scope. You'll put together a proposal. You'll work out. You have some formula for figuring out what you think it's going to cost in terms of you. You're going to add some margin, some profit. You may look at that number and think, "Wow, that's way too much. I'm going to knock it down a little bit." Somehow you come up with a number for this project and a timeline or a way for pricing out your services. Maybe you do hourly for the design and for the CA. I mean, there's a million and one different ways that firms will do this, but you come up with a proposal. And then typically the way you do that, you shoot that over to them via email. And then what's the strategy? We're going to cross our fingers. We're going to hope, and we're going to win some and we're going to lose some, and we're just going to see what happens. Okay. This may have worked in the past. What I will tell you is this is not going to work going into the future. You need to be more sophisticated in the way that you onboard and you vet clients. And the principle here is this. Instead of selling, and you don't even sell. So there's actually 3 levels here that I would say. There's quoting. There's selling. So most architects are quoting, which is just, you're just kind of putting out a proposal and hoping that you guys win the project, trying to convince, trying to persuade. You may do some selling, and I call selling persuading, convincing, trying to tell them, "Hey, this is why you should use us." If you find yourself in a conversation with a client and you're trying to convince them that you have value, you have already lost. Go back to square one. You may win some of those, but most of the time you're going to lose. Because there's a psychological trigger called resistance. And what resistance is the more that you try to convince someone that something's right, the more they're going to feel defensive. They're going to feel an energy of defense. They're going to put up defensive. They're going to doubt. They're going to be skeptical. Okay. This is why old school selling doesn't work. We all know this. There's the memes about the car salesman. "Hey, if you buy today, we can get $5,000 off. Take the car off right now. Don't you love this new car smell?" It's like that kind of selling energy. Of course, I know no one here does that, because, no one here is a used car salesman, right? As architects, at least we're not doing that, right? But we still do sell in some instances, right? It's the same kind of flavor. When you're trying to convince a client of your value, when the question was saying, "Why your fees so much?" or "You're valuable," when you're explaining and you're trying to tell, you've already lost the battle. So this is 1. This is 2. Even more effective of those is number 3, which is qualifying. What I want you to consider is that when you're communicating your value to your client, what you need to be doing is you need to be qualifying your clients for a fit. Okay? If you just think about this energetically, it's radically different than you feeling like you're trying to sell them something, hoping that you're winning the project. No, it's a different frame. And what I mean by frame is, as the architect and as the professional, you set up your own value because you know what your value is. You establish the frame of the engagement. And the frame is this: I am a professional. We provide enormous and tremendous value, and we're selective about the clients that we bring on. So this is principle number 4, is really understanding that I'm going to say, we are selective. Now, you may not be at the point, like, there's feast or famine architecture. So you may not be at the point right now. You're like, "Well, Enoch, we need to select some of these. We need to take on some of these smaller projects. We can't afford to say no to these." I get that. So you may have to do that for a little while. But when you apply principles of that we're talking about here today, of qualifying instead of selling, you will find yourself slowly but surely moving into a value pricing scenario, where then you are able to start to capture fees like this instead of fees like this. Okay. So if this is making sense, let me know what you're hearing here. Like, if it's making sense, just say, "Yes, it's making sense." Or if it's not making sense, say no. But just drop in, "Yes, making sense," and let's move on. When you are qualifying clients, ultimately what you're looking for is you're looking for a fit. You're looking for a fit from their side, and you're looking for a fit from your side. Okay. Now, over the past 10 years, we've developed and we teach something called the pull method. And pardon the Brits, there's a little bit of a double entendre there for those of you who are from the UK. But in America, it doesn't have that same meaning, okay? All right. But the pull method is a different way of presenting your architectural services, because what you want your clients to do in a position where you are in a proposing situation with a client, ideally, you want them to be fighting for your services. Does this make sense? So instead of you fighting to win them as a client, you want to flip the tables, flip the script, turn the tables. You want them to be fighting for you. So you want them to be justifying why they should work with you. This is the way that this is where you want to be at. And there's a couple things that happen here that need to go into it, right? So when we look at the way you market your practice, the way you present your practice. Okay, there's a couple things that go into this here. There's your positioning. There's your packaging. And let me talk quickly about what these are. So positioning is how people, like when you're creating your brand image, it's how other people and other people in the industry see your firm in relation to all the other options, right? So let me say Amazon, boom. Amazon versus Nordstrom's. Okay. Walmart versus Nordstrom's. Here in the United States, we have Costco, right, versus one of the high-end grocery stores like Whole Foods, right? Neither one of them is, I'm not going to say like one is better than the other, but there's a difference here that when I say those names, my mind instantly begins to categorize these things and put in a hierarchy of where they're actually at. So one of the questions you need to ask yourself and be very, very clear about in your messaging and everything is like your positioning of your practice. Like, where do you want to fit in amongst your competitors? This is not easy to do. Packaging is basically how that is then communicated to the marketplace. It goes down to everything from the kind of car you drive, the clothes you wear, how you present yourself, the way you conduct your initial meetings, all the way to your website, your brochures, your branding, your messaging, the kind of work that you do. All of this is like, it's how everything is packaged up. It's the difference between having a $50 handbag at Walmart and a $50,000 handbag at a high-end custom handbag store. Likely, most of the materials are going to be the same. The design may be a little bit different, but the real difference there is going to be these two things right here, the positioning and the packaging. Let me know if that makes sense. Nordstrom's has left Canada, unfortunate. Well, hey, look. Hey, Merrick. Hey, good to see you, by the way. Sears is my last name. It's completely gone out of business. So, that's this, we'll play the violin for Sears and some of those department stores. All right. Okay, so let's have a look at what we call and what we've a very useful framework for running an architectural practice called the SMART practice method. And I talked about this earlier, and I said that I'm going to give you access to, and perhaps the OAA can even send out the link to this for those of you who registered for this webinar, so you can get more information about some of the frameworks that have been proven useful to help small practitioners achieve freedom in their practice and more agency, right? But here's the way that this particular framework works. Okay, before I do that though, I really want to come back here because this is so essential. I want to make sure that you all are getting this. When we're talking about communicating value, the other principle here that I'm going to throw up on the board is that you need to reiterate. Well, first of all, step number one, let's back up here on a little pull method framework. So what is the pull method? Let's have a look. This is a method for communicating value powerfully. Number one, establish expectations and set the frame. Okay, what do I mean by that? A frame is something in psychology that is used to organize something, right? So in architectural speak, we might say the frame would be the program, right? We know that eventually the building's not going to look like the program, but when the program, we're looking at adjacencies, we have different colored boxes, we have circulation paths. Like, it's a framework that then we're going to refine that. We're going to build it out, switch things around, move things up and down, slide things over, and then eventually you're going to come up with a schematic design. You're going to come up with a design, right? So that's what a framework is. So when you're entering into a conversation with an initial client, and this happens even in your marketing before they come to your practice, it's important that you're establishing the frame. So let me tell you, doctors and lawyers, they do a great job of this. For instance, in a doctor's office, they establish the frame. It's all very psychological. You walk in the building, down a long hallway, you walk into the doctor's office. When you get in there, there's this glass window. You have to fill out some forms. You have to sit there for 10 minutes filling out all your personal information. You have to check a lot of boxes about personal things you would probably never tell anyone except for your doctor. So already they're getting you to expose yourself very vulnerably in the first 10 minutes of you walking into that office. You take that form back, you slide it back to the receptionist. She then looks it over. She says, great, I'll call your number when you're ready. You sit down, bing, bing, bing. The door opens. A nurse comes out. The nurse calls your name, takes you back to the office, says, hey, put on this gown, take off your clothes. You take off your clothes, you put on the gown. The doctor knocks on the door, boom, boom, boom. He or she comes into the office, looks you over, touches you in places that a normal person would never touch you, asks you to pay a lot of money if you have some sort of health condition. Okay, this is a frame. So if you think about the psychological impact of all that, like you filling out the forms, you sitting in the office, there's a very clear hierarchy that's being established that causes you to put the doctor in a place of trust. Now, unfortunately, what has happened in the architecture industry is the flame has been flipped to where now architects are now purchasing under the rules of the buyers. In other words, your buyers are running the process. Your buyers are shopping you around, right? We have no established frame for how we engage with our clients in a qualification process. Long ago, we didn't even know this battle existed, and that's why we lost it. Okay. The good news is we can start winning this battle, but it starts with each one of you starting to learn how to qualify people instead of trying to sell people, how to, instead of just sending a proposal and just closing, actually being able to understand the value for their eyes and then reiterate to them through the process that I'm talking right now. So number one, establish the frame. Number two, and this is a simplified version, we have to find out, right? So just like you go into the doctor and they're asking you all these questions and you're checking things off on the box. Have you ever had, do you smoke? Multiple sexual partners. I mean, they get very, very personal, right? Don't you agree? Okay. So they're asking you a lot of very personal details. So the same thing as the process you need to understand about your clients, because when you understand where your clients are from, the challenges they're having, their business problems, the impacts of these business problems, then you begin to see a solution. But the key here is that when you start to understand the problems and issues here, you need to be able to reiterate it back to your clients in a way that they understand it. Okay, meaning using their own language. You're going to talk about the solution in the same language as they've presented you the problems with. Now, one thing here, because I want to leave a little bit of time for questions, I'm just going to really, really touch on this very, very quickly. And the reason why we're going so fast here is because this is like a day long. I teach a 3-day seminar on this very topic. So this is very, very condensed here, right? And I'm hoping that I'm delivering enough value here, number one, to help you just get on fire about like really pursuing this idea of communicating value. Because when you unlock this, it's a skill set. It's not something you're going to pick up in a 1 hour webinar like this. This is something you need to practice. You need to become a student of communicating value. Now, there's another principle here that I didn't touch on that I'm gonna add right here, and this goes like this: you sell how you buy. So I had a sole practicing architect who reached out to me and my team last week. We had a conversation with her. She liked, what we do. She thought that's amazing. I would love to have some of these results that your clients are having in their practices. That sounds awesome, right? So she was very excited about working with us. But the problem she was having is this undervaluing. She's like, I'm working with a lot of small projects. My background is working on very high-end projects. I want to get more of those kind of clients. I want to work with clients who value what I do, where it's not such an uphill battle to try to convince them of my value. And I was like, got it. So we took her through our process, diagnosed her pain. We were able to say, okay, look, it looks like this may be a fit for us. But here's what happened. I thought this is interesting. It's normal human psychology. The minute I turned the table over to her to let her start asking questions, and I told her our fee that we charge, we're not cheap. Then she started doing to us what all of her clients do to her. She started telling me, wow, Enoch, that's a lot more. That's more. I talked to another company over here and they're doing it for half of that. Right? So she started having this conversation with me. And I was just internally, I was good naturedly chuckling because I could see it so clearly. I'm like, I see one of the problems here. Like, I can very clearly see it. It's like, you're not going to change the way that you sell until you change the way you buy. Okay. So if you're always negotiating with everyone else, if you're always a do-it-yourself or trying to do everything yourself, guess what's going to happen? You're going to attract that into your life. If you're always shopping around and asking other people to compare prices and looking at everything as a cost instead of an investment, well, that's what you're going to experience and that's what you're going to bring to you. Because these kind of people over here, like our client who's charging $250,000, okay, they are very clear on their value and they're not working with clients who want to go negotiate with them. I mean, sure, there's some negotiation that happens, but they're not working with clients these clients who pay these kind of fees, they see the value of hiring an architect and getting a fantastic design. Okay, great. Now, we have a little bit of time left for questions. So I'd love to answer and field any questions that you have. If you feel free to ask them. I'm going to look here on this. William Scott says, looks to me like scribbles Einstein would make. I mean, I don't know if that's a compliment or or a slight. I'm not sure quite how to take that. I'll take it as a compliment. Let's see here. Qualifying makes sense. First step of qualifying is just switching your mindset and understanding that when you're getting into a proposal conversation with a client, that you're looking for a fit. And as part of that, you need to be clear about what makes a fit. So if a client who doesn't appreciate design is not a fit, you need to decide that and make a stand and say, hey, look, it looks like we're probably not a fit. Okay, so let me give you one example about how this would work in a live situation. So say you came to me and I'm an architect and you said, hey, Enoch, your fee's a lot of money. We have another firm over there who can do it for half the price of what you offer. And then I will say, I get it. Fantastic. As a matter of fact, I know firms even cheaper than that. Now this may not be a fit. No problem. I understand. Shall we end it here? You're right. We're not cheap. And they'll be like, well, then they might get curious. They might start to ask, well, why are you more expensive? I might say, well, let me ask you a question. If you were going to spend more money on a design solution or with an architectural team more than any other people out there, why would you spend that extra money? Why would you spend more? See, I'm asking because they have to qualify themselves. I want to see how they think. If they come back at me and they say, it doesn't matter, I would just go with the cheapest, I'd be like, well, great, good luck with that. I have a whole Rolodex of very cheap architects. I have the cheapest one, as a matter of fact. He's not even an architect. He was a plumber, and he just started doing, he loves architecture, so he does designs. I can send you to him. He's very, very cheap. Or if they come back and they say, no, I would pay for a better design. I would be like, well, let's talk about that. Let's see, what does a better design look like for you? So you see, it's a different process than what we're usually dealing with in architecture. All right. So that's about a wrap for today. Let's see, I see one question came in here. Some clients pay for a great design and problem solving, then shop around for permit drawings to other architects, and some of them go along with it. How to stop that from happening? So David, this is part of setting the frame up front. Okay. So in that situation, like there's a lot of ways. And if you and I were like on a separate call, we could talk through it and come up with a specific fix for that particular problem. But part of it is establishing expectations. So what I want to know, David, at the beginning of every client engagement if I'm an architect, is I want to understand my client's process for purchasing and buying. So one question that you might want to consider putting into your upfront, like your very first initial conversation, is just asking, oh, and by the way, let me see what you say here. Some clients pay for a great design and problem solving, then shop around for permit drawings. Okay. By the way, one of my greatest fears is, and this is going to take a bit of vulnerability, it takes a little skill to do this, but you're going to say, one of my greatest fears as an architect is that you will, hire us for the initial phase of the project, get our great designs, fire us, and then shop around for a cheaper architect that can do a substandard job and put together the drawings for that. And you're going to be looking to save a lot of money. We won't be happy because the design will get pulled off like we want. Eventually, we find the clients that do that aren't happy because they didn't get what they actually wanted. That's not what's happening here, is it? There's different ways to ask this type of question. But I would ask is say, okay, Mr. Client, I'm just out of curiosity, what's your process for buying? What's your process for acquiring architectural services? Would you mind sharing that with me? And they'll tell you, well, we're shopping around for different architects. So they'll say, well, that's why we're talking to you. And I say, okay, great. And you're going to take my fee and shop it around to other people. Is that your plan? And then they'll tell you, right? So again, it's leaning in with curiosity, finding out, establishing parity in the relationship, asking the right questions. And then at the end of the day, people are still going to do that to you. okay? But you can really minimize it. As a matter of fact, for most of our clients, those days are long gone. They 5x their fees. They're getting a lot more value out of their projects, which gives them agency. All right, so for those of you who'd like some more information on what it means to run a smart practice and the framework that I talked today, you can go to smartpracticemethod.com. There's like a 45-minute video for free that you can access over there. Happy to have you do that. If anyone wants to reach out, if anyone would, is like understands that you don't want to reinvent the wheel on yourself and you would like to be one of the courageous firms who implements the smart practice method on the front lines of claiming their own value, feel free to reach out to me and my team and say, hey, I'd love to have a chat with you. Because these are the kind of issues that we help firms solve, and we've done it for 10 years now. So thank you, everybody, and see if there's any other questions. Thanks for dropping the link in there. Khaled put the link in there. Appreciate it. Give an example of online positioning. Thank you for the presentation. This is not really a question, but an observation. I do improv comedy as a hobby. The pull, oh, wow, the pull method for framing values is very similar to improv actors setting up scenes. Andrew, would you mind reaching out to me via email? Maybe you come on the podcast and talk about, that's really cool. If you're open to it, I'd love to have a chat. Just send me an email. I'm intrigued by that. I want to know more. Rachel says, how do I practice these concepts as a student or entry-level designer? Where are the opportunities to practice this before you have your own firm? So as a student, it may be more difficult because as a student, a lot of times in my experience, the way architecture is presented is very theoretical. You're presenting to architects. So it's going to be all architectural speak. But what I would recommend, Rachel, is start learning about selling. So although, a lot of the selling literature out there doesn't apply directly to architecture, when you learn the principles behind it, you can then form those principles back into what we do as architects. Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody, for being on the call today. I love what we do here. I love talking about this concept of value. You all have incredible value that I'm sure most of you have not even tapped yet because you're facing the tidal wave of clients who are just causing you to want to push down your fees instead of capturing the immense value that you have. So I would say, make a stand, take a stand. You have more value than you even think you do. Let's turn the tide here. Let's establish the frameworks that elevate architecture once again as a valuable profession so we can start to bring the best and brightest back in and help solving these huge issues that society is facing today. All right. Khaled, you said, give us an example of online positioning. I'm not quite sure what that means, but I did mention positioning in terms of Nordstrom's or let's say Whole Foods versus your grocery store, right? Whole Foods, if you look at the branding, if you look at the packaging, if you look at the way they promote organic content, if you look at everything about their messaging, there's a very particular positioning that even their pricing positions them. Okay, so pricing is one thing you can use for positioning. Are you the expensive firm? Are you the cheap firm? All right. Thank you, everybody, for today. Felix, thanks for having me, and thank you for your great work coordinating this and pulling off this. The technology seemed to have cooperated with us today.
No, Enoch, thank you very much. It was great having you with us today, and also thanks to everyone who attended. As we conclude this webinar, I would like to draw your attention to some announcements. The next webinar takes place in 2 weeks on May the 30th, also at 11 a.m. under the title, The Role of CSA B651 Standard in Building a Barrier-Free Canada. As mentioned, the OAA will report your participation in this webinar to your transcript. Therefore, there is no need for individual reporting on your part. Additionally, all attendees will soon receive an email with a link to submit your feedback. Once again, thank you very much for your attendance and have a productive and pleasant remainder of your day. Enoch, thanks again very much and take care.
You're welcome. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye-bye.